imagine for a second that you are handed a highly technical, incredibly dense book on mid-century French psychoanalysis.
I mean, most people are instantly picturing a dusty university library, right?
Exactly. You are expecting, like, impenetrable academic jargon. You expect this quiet, theoretical, maybe even gentle critique of modern neuroses.
Yeah, something very dry.
Right. But then you open the cover and you realize you haven't been handed a scalpel for delicate psychological surgery. You have been handed a sledgehammer.
Or maybe broadsword.
Yeah, a broadsword. And it is being swung wildly right in the middle of the modern culture war. So, welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
It's great to be here.
Right at the top, I need to remind you to like this deep dive and subscribe to the show so you never miss out on these really intense explorations we do here.
Because this one is definitely intense. It is a profound bait and switch in the most fascinating way possible.
It really is.
You go in expecting this gentle academic breakdown of the human mind, and instead you find yourself reading what is essentially a tactical field manual.
Exactly. And that is the manual we are unpacking today. We are looking at a brand new, incredibly provocative, ultra-long and incisive ebook. The title alone really sets the stage.
Unlock Your True Self.
Right, Unlock Your True Self, Mastering Lacanian Psychology by Conrad Riker. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you are a man seeking to understand modern masculinity, if you are looking to make sense of traditional roles, or if you are trying to understand the history of our institutions before they were, as the author argues, captured by feminists and Marxists, this deep dive is custom tailored for you.
It's aimed directly at that audience.
Oh, absolutely. Riker's text is this radical, unapologetic war manual for reclaiming identity. And I want to mention, throughout the show and at the end, I'll be reminding you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this ebook.
Highly recommend picking it up.
For sure. And definitely follow the author, at Conrad Riker, over at Substack.
Because the ambition of this book is just staggering. I mean, Conrad Riker is attempting a massive, unprecedented synthesis here.
Unprecedented is the word.
He is taking the work of Jacques Lacan, who, by the way, is universally considered one of the most notoriously difficult, abstract French psychoanalysts of the 20th century.
The guy is notoriously hard to read.
Very. And Riker is seamlessly merging those complex theories with very modern, red-pilled manosphere and men's rights activist talking points.
Which is wild.
Shouldn't work on paper. But the way he constructs the argument is incredibly methodical.
But before we take one more step into that construction, we need to explicitly set the ground rules for today's discussion.
Yes, very important.
This is crucial for you, the listener. The text we are analyzing today contains highly politically charged content. I mean, Riker makes very aggressive arguments about feminism, Marxism, and what he views as the systemic, deliberate dismantling of men in modern society.
He does not hold back.
No, he doesn't. So we need to make it crystal clear to you. We are not taking sides.
That is exactly right. We are not endorsing these right-wing or anti-woke viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Right.
Our mission today is strict impartiality. We are here to examine the architecture of his argument, not to validate or invalidate his politics.
Think of us as your tour guides through a very intense landscape. Our job is to impartially report, analyze, and synthesize Riker's arguments.
Just laying it all out there.
Exactly. We want to help you understand the specific worldview presented in this original source material, figure out how it is logically constructed, and explore why it is resonating so deeply with its target audience. So, with that framework locked in, are you ready to jump into the deep end?
Let's dive in.
I want to start with this wildly striking image that Riker paints very early on in the text. It sets the tone perfectly. The year is 1976.
Classic era.
Arnold Schwarzenegger is in Gold's Gym. He is absolutely covered in sweat, bench pressing 225 pounds. And between sets, while he's resting on the bench, what is he doing?
He is reading Jacques Lacan's Écrits.
Right. Riker uses this incredibly vivid, almost paradoxical image to establish the core philosophical engine of his entire worldview.
It's such a great hook.
He claims that modern psychology has essentially been weaponized to make men docile. But he argues that Lacan's theories, specifically something called the mirror stage, can be reverse engineered and weaponized by men to forge their own identity.
It's a brilliant rhetorical framing by Riker, because he immediately flips the traditional purpose of therapy on its head.
Right.
And to understand why this is so subversive, we really have to define what the mirror stage actually is in traditional Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Please do, because, man, When I read that section, my head started spinning. Break down the mirror stage for me. What is Lacan actually saying happens to us?
Okay, so in traditional Lacanian theory, the mirror stage happens when an infant, usually around 6 to 18 months old, first sees their reflection in a mirror.
Okay, pretty standard developmental stuff.
Right. But before this moment, the infant doesn't feel like a unified person. They experience their body as fragmented, chaotic, just this mess of uncoordinated limbs and needs. They are helpless.
Just a blob of instincts.
Exactly. But then they look in the mirror and they see a whole, complete, seemingly perfect image of themselves.
So they see this perfect version of themselves, but they still feel like a chaotic mess inside.
Precisely. And that creates a permanent psychological gap. It is a moment of profound alienation. The infant realizes, that perfect image in the mirror is me, but I don't feel perfect.
Oh, wow.
It creates a lifelong tension between the messy internal reality and the idealized external image, what Lacan calls the ideal I.
The ideal I, right?
Now, modern therapy often tries to soothe that gap. Modern psychology looks at that alienation and says, let's help you accept your messy self.
Like you are fine the way you are.
Right. Let's make you comfortable with the fact that you aren't that perfect image.
Okay, I see where this is going. Riker is arguing the exact opposite, isn't he?
He is.
He is saying identity isn't something you discover by accepting your flaws on a silent yoga retreat in Bali. It's something you actively build through the friction of that gap. When I was reading this, I immediately thought of Conor McGregor.
Oh, that is an interesting connection. How do you mean?
Well, think about McGregor before a massive UFC fight, especially early in his career. He is wearing these immaculate, custom-tailored suits. He is viciously, eloquently trashing his opponent.
The strut, confident.
Exactly. He projects this aura of absolute, untouchable invincibility. It almost feels like he is looking at an idealized image of himself, an ideal I, as you called it, and speaking it into existence through pure conflict.
That makes total sense.
He isn't sitting back saying, I am enough as I am. He is aggressively forcing his chaotic internal self to match the godlike image he has projected out into the world.
That analogy maps perfectly onto Riker's interpretation. In fact, Riker's whole premise is that our ancestors didn't soothe the gap. They used that gap as fuel.
Right.
He argues McGregor didn't find his confidence. He constructed it through what Riker calls Lacanian conflict. And this brings us to another dense Lacanian term that Riker repurposes,
Hit me with it.
the objet petit a.
Right, the unattainable object of desire. Walk me through how Riker applies this to modern men, because he ties this directly to evolutionary biology, which is a fascinating leap from French psychoanalysis.
It really is. So Lacan argues that because of that gap we just talked about, humans are always chasing a sense of wholeness that we can never quite reach. That missing piece is the objet petit a.
It's the carrot on the stick.
It's exactly the carrot on the stick.
Yes.
Riker takes this psychoanalytic concept and maps it directly onto the biological reality of the manosphere. He argues that men are biologically, evolutionarily wired for a scarcity mindset.
Because for our ancestors, complacency literally meant death.
Exactly. If you were a prehistoric man and you felt whole and satisfied, you stopped hunting. You stopped guarding the perimeter.
She just hung out by the fire.
Right. You stopped competing for mates, and your genetic line was promptly erased by a neighboring tribe or a predator. You had to constantly chase the unattainable object.
Whether that was perfect security, absolute dominance, or ultimate survival. So he says, modern men don't hunt mammoths anymore, we hunt market share. It's the exact same prefrontal cortex wiring, the same biological drive, just a different prey.
Which is where Riker levels his primary critique against the modern corporate world. He claims that institutions have systematically pathologized this biological drive.
Pathologized it, yeah.
Think about how the corporate world operates today. Riker points out that human resources departments have spent the last 2 decades taking concepts like the war room or the bullpen and rebranding them as collaborative ideation spaces.
Oh man, I've sat in those spaces. Lots of beanbag chairs and pastel colors.
Right. And Riker claims this isn't just an aesthetic choice. It is a psychological neutering of male survival instincts.
Oh, neutering.
When you take a creature wired by millions of years of evolution to conquer, compete, and dominate his environment, and you tell him he needs to practice active listening in a circle of beanbag chairs.
Right, it's just a complete mismatch.
Riker argues you are pathologizing the very biological drive that built civilization in the first place.
And he doesn't just make this as a philosophical claim. He brings the receipts on the biological reality of this drive. There's a fascinating study he highlights from the University of Cambridge.
I love this part of the book.
The researchers tracked male stock traders and corporate employees, and they found that men who successfully secure a promotion or a major deal experience a 15% testosterone surge within 48 hours of the event.
That data point is crucial for Riker's argument.
It really is, because it proves that the physical body is actively rewarding conquest. The endocrine system is literally pumping out hormones to celebrate dominance and victory.
It's chemical validation.
Exactly. But Riker points out the terrifying paradox of modern life.
Yeah.
If you act on that primal, biologically rewarded energy today in a corporate setting, you get flagged by HR. You get sent to a seminar on toxic masculinity.
And if the corporate world won't let men express that Lacanian lack, that hunger, where do they go? Riker argues they end up getting preyed upon by the modern self-help industry.
Oh, his takedown of self-help is legendary.
He has a brutal critique of this. He notes that self-help is now an $11.6 billion industry. And he specifically singles out figures like Tony Robbins for what he calls dominance theater.
The section where he breaks down firewalking is absolutely ruthless. I mean, he just eviscerates the whole concept.
He really does. Riker looks at a phenomenon where men are paying $5,000 to go to a hotel conference center and walk across hot coals.
Which sounds crazy when you say it out loud.
Modern society views this as an empowering breakthrough, but Riker views it as a tragic simulation.
Because he argues that men are so starved of real, high-stakes Viking initiation rites, they are so desperate to prove they can survive the fire and bridge that Lacanian gap, that they will pay thousands of dollars to simulate danger with a liability waiver.
It is dominance theater because there is no real threat, no real conquest. It is an artificial release valve for a biological imperative that society refuses to let men express in the real world.
So if you are listening to this, think about your own life through Riker's lens. He is asking you to consider how modern society attempts to replace primal rites of passage with sanitized, corporate-approved substitutes.
Exactly.
He says we treat surviving a 3-hour Joe Rogan DMT podcast rant as if it were a coming-of-age ceremony. Or we have middle-aged guys crying on stationary bikes because a Peloton instructor yelled, "You're enough. You don't need to prove anything to anyone."
And if we connect that Peloton mantra back to the Lacanian foundation, Riker is essentially saying that telling a man you're enough is biologically offensive to his nature.
Offensive to his nature.
Right. The Lacanian lack that hunger for more, that desperate need to bridge the gap between who you are and the ideal image in the mirror is the engine of male achievement.
The engine.
When society tries to therapize that hunger away, Riker argues it doesn't make men happier. It leaves them depressed, directionless, and ripe for exploitation.
Which naturally leads to the next massive question. Because if identity is forged through conflict and competition, and if men are biologically hardwired to conquer, how did the institutions manage to disarm them so thoroughly?
Right, how do they pull it off?
If the drive is that primal, how was it suppressed? And Riker's answer to this is wild. He says they didn't do it with physical force, they didn't use armies or police, they did it with a dictionary.
This is a pivotal transition in the book. Riker moves from biology into linguistics, offering an intense critique of what he calls the symbolic order.
He outlines a massive, sweeping critique of woke linguistics, and he points to real-world, modern examples to back this up. He cites the University of Chicago banning masculine pronouns in certain philosophy classes back in 2022.
A huge moment.
He argues that feminists and Marxists successfully captured our institutions not by winning debates, but by literally rewriting the dictionary. He points to the Oxford English Dictionary officially adding pronouns like they and zer in 2020 as a prime example of this institutional capture.
Now, to understand why Riker thinks a few new words in a dictionary is so devastating to male identity, we have to go back to Lacan and define the symbolic order.
Yes, please. Because on the surface, someone might say, who cares if they add a pronoun? Just use it and move on. Why does Riker view this as an existential threat?
In Lacanian psychoanalysis, the symbolic order is the shared cultural code. It is the complex web of language, laws, customs, and social norms that literally dictates reality.
Dictates reality.
You do not exist outside of the symbolic order.
Right.
Your very thoughts are structured by the language you are taught to use. The symbolic order is what separates humans from animals. It is the rule book of reality.
So language isn't just how we describe the world, it is the framework that builds the world.
Exactly. So Riker argues that when captured institutions disrupt this fundamental code with gender-neutral jargon and forced pronoun usage, they aren't just trying to be polite or inclusive.
He views it as an act of psychological warfare. By untethering language from biological reality, he claims they are intentionally creating societal psychosis. They are forcing men to deny what they can clearly see with their own eyes in order to participate in polite society.
I love the analogy he uses here to illustrate how men used to wield language. He talks about the Roman paterfamilias.
Yes, the head of the household.
He points out that the male head of a Roman household didn't sit around seeking consensus from a committee. He didn't ask for everyone's lived experience before making a decision. He laid down the terms of reality through binding verbal contracts. His word was literal law.
Total authority.
So help me connect the dots here. How does Riker connect the loss of this Roman command voice to the broader collapse of male authority in modern society?
It's a profound connection. Riker is arguing that the historical patriarchy wasn't just built on physical strength or the threat of violence, it was built by the authoritative, unapologetic use of language.
The command voice. The command voice is what builds bridges, wins wars, and maintains order. When modern men are forced to preface every single thought with an apology.
Oh, like, as a cishet male, I might be wrong, but...
Exactly. Or, I want to be mindful of everyone's trauma before I suggest this. When they do that, they are linguistically castrating themselves. They are giving up the command voice.
And he has the data to back up how pervasive this self-silencing has become. He cites data from Fire the Foundation for Individual Rights, an expression from 2023, showing that men now self-censor their true opinions at twice the rate of women.
Twice the rate.
That is a staggering statistic. Men are treating their own thoughts like unexploded ordnance in the workplace.
Because the symbolic order has been entirely flipped, the new institutional rulebook punishes the traditional male command voice. What used to be considered decisive leadership is now coded by HR as hostile, microaggressive, or abusive. Riker points out an evolutionary truth here. Human tribes that spent millennia arguing over semantics and emotional validation instead of sharpening spears and building walls were brutally removed from the gene pool.
He illustrates this clash between biology and manipulated language by bringing up a very famous pop culture moment. The infamous Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson interview on Channel 4.
So what you're saying is a lobster interview.
Exactly. Anyone in the manosphere or who follows internet culture knows this interview. But Riker frames that viral moment as much more than just a right-wing debate victory. He frames it as a massive cultural inflection point.
He views that interview as the death rattle of a constructed feminist ideology, violently colliding with evolutionary truth. Think about what happened in that exchange.
Right, she was trying to trap him.
Newman was using all the tools of the modern captured symbolic order, trying to reframe Peterson's words, using shame, policing his language. And Peterson completely bypassed her linguistic traps by bringing up the serotonin-driven pecking orders of lobsters, which have existed for 350 million years.
It hit a massive nerve. The internet exploded.
Riker argues the institutional left freaked out over the lobster comment, not because it was silly, but because Peterson was using unarguable biology to validate male hierarchies.
He bought receipts from nature.
He proved that hierarchy and dominance aren't social constructs invented by the patriarchy. They are baked into our neurochemistry. He bypassed their manipulated dictionary entirely.
So listener, look at your daily life, your job, your interactions through this lens. Riker is challenging you to ask, how much of corporate HR policy, how many of those mandatory sensitivity trainings you have to endlessly click through are actually just the linguistic cage?
It's a great question.
Are they truly about making people feel safe, or are they designed to domesticate primal male energy by policing the very words you are allowed to think with?
And that leads to a rather dark but necessary question, which Riker addresses head on.
Yeah, let's get into the fallout.
If language is policed at this level, and if the institutions are fully captured by this new symbolic order, what is the tangible result for the men living under this system? Riker argues the inevitable result is a total, measurable collapse in male vitality, drive, and specifically, dating success.
This is where the book shifts from theoretical linguistics into raw, brutal data, and honestly, it gets pretty bleak. The stats Riker pulls to illustrate the modern sexual marketplace are jaw-dropping.
Bleak is the right word.
He cites a 2022 National Institutes of Health study showing that 34% of men under the age of 30 haven't had sex in the past year. Over a third of young men are completely sidelined from reproduction.
Unbelievable.
And on a biological level, he points out that male sperm counts globally have plummeted an astounding 59% since 1973.
Riker contrasts the dating world of 1958 with 2024 to really drive home how unnatural this collapse is. He paints a picture of 1958.
Mm.
A high school guy with a part-time job could take a girl to a malt shop on the dollar, fix the flat tire on her dad's car, and earn genuine respect and romantic interest based on his utility and character.
Just being a solid, useful guy.
Right. The playing field was relatively localized and meritocratic.
And contrast that with today. Riker says average Dave is spending $300 a month on premium dating app subscriptions just to be left on red.
Just brutal.
And why is average Dave ignored? Because of the infamous 80-20 rule on apps like Tinder. Riker brings up the data showing that 80% of women on these digital platforms are exclusively competing for the top 20% of men, the guys with the height, the income, the perfectly curated Instagram aesthetics.
Meanwhile, the bottom 80% of men are effectively invisible.
Invisible and financially drained, regular guys are shelling out subscription fees on OnlyFans just to watch someone eat sushi in a bathtub because that is the closest thing to female interaction the market allows them to buy.
It's wild.
Riker attributes this to female hypergamy, which he says is baked into the cake of evolutionary psychology.
Hypergamy being the biological drive for women to seek a mate of equal or higher socioeconomic status.
Right. Women are wired to seek the highest status mate for the survival of their offspring. But I want to push back on Riker here, or at least ask you to clarify his logic, because he takes this concept to an extreme place.
He does, yeah.
He argues that the legal system has weaponized hypergamy against men. He literally compares modern alimony and divorce settlements to reparations for having to look at your face.
That line is so harsh.
He describes the entire domestic dating and marriage scene as a rigged casino where the house always wins. So if the system is that stacked, how does the author suggest men navigate it? Does he say they should just try harder to become that top 20%?
No, and this is where Riker breaks away from traditional self-help or pickup artist advice. His solution is much more radical. Opt out entirely.
Just leave the game.
If you realize you are playing in a rigged casino, you don't keep feeding quarters into the slot machine. You leave the casino. This is the rationale behind his praise for the Passport Bros movement.
The guys who are leaving the West to find wives?
Exactly. Riker views Passport Bros men who take their Western resources and move to places like the Philippines, Colombia, or Eastern Europe as highly rational actors. They're engaging in geographic arbitrage.
Geographic arbitrage, wow.
They're moving to cultures where traditional gender roles haven't been deconstructed by third-wave feminism, and where their resources and desire to provide are met with respect rather than suspicion.
The data he uses to back up this strategy is pretty compelling. He notes that domestic U.S. marriage divorce rates are hovering around 50%, and of those divorces, a staggering 70% are initiated by women.
70%.
But when you look at international unions, Western men marrying women from traditional non-Western cultures, the divorce rate plummets to below 10%.
To Riker, that statistical gap proves that modern Western marriage isn't a partnership. It's a legal trap designed to extract resources from men. He uses Elon Musk as the ultimate high-profile cautionary tale of this dynamic.
That part was wild. He uses Musk to prove that no amount of status can protect you from the system.
Right. Think about Elon Musk. Here's a man who builds rockets that land themselves vertically on drone ships in the middle of the ocean. He is arguably the most successful, high-status man on Earth.
Literally the richest man.
Yet a California judge still forced him to pay a massive, multi-million-dollar settlement in family court, despite having 50-50 custody of his children.
Riker calls this financial cuckoldry. It's an aggressive term, but he uses it to argue that if the system can extract resources from a billionaire genius who has half custody of his kids, average Dave has absolutely zero chance of surviving family court intact.
Zero chance.
He frames modern marriage under these current laws as a plantation where men are essentially indentured laborers, generating wealth that can be seized at any moment.
And this is where we have to ask the listener to pause and reflect on the massive structural cultural shifts we are seeing right now. Think about the rise of movements like No Marriage November, where men on social media are actively publicly encouraging each other to abstain from signing the legal contract of marriage.
Or look at that massive YouGov study that recently came out showing that 63% of young men are now leaning heavily conservative, creating a massive political gender divide with young women.
It's a huge shift.
Riker forces us to ask, is this just a temporary backlash? Is it just an edgy trend on TikTok? Or is this, as he argues, a permanent biological realignment? Are young men fundamentally rejecting a system that they feel heavily taxes their labor, punishes their ambition, and actively hates their masculine nature?
That underlying tension between what society ruthlessly demands of men and how it culturally treats them is the exact focus of Riker's next major argument.
Yeah, let's get into the economics of it.
Because he claims that while society shames male nature in the boardroom and the bedroom, it absolutely fundamentally relies on male sacrifice in the physical world to keep civilization from collapsing.
Yes. This brings us to what I think is the most visceral, undeniable part of the book. Riker calls it the graveyard shift paradox in his section on primal economics.
Such a powerful concept.
He points out a glaring hypocrisy in the modern discourse on privilege. He pulls data straight from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, which openly admits that 94% of all workplace deaths are men.
94%.
100% of underwater welders, one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet, are male.
Riker is forcing the reader to look at the invisible infrastructure of society. The modern world feels safe and sanitized, but the electrical grid that powers the servers so that academics can complain about toxic masculinity on social media, that grid is maintained by men working in freezing rain, handling high voltage lines. The sewers, the mines, the oil rigs, it is all maintained by men doing highly dangerous, physically brutal work that destroys their bodies.
To illustrate how society views this sacrifice, he brings up the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion in 2010. 11 men died in a literal towering fireball in the middle of the ocean trying to extract energy for the grid.
Just horrific.
And Riker points out a detail that was swept under the rug. Widows of the workers actually sued BP, not just for corporate negligence, but for encouraging a culture of macho risk-taking.
That lawsuit perfectly encapsulates Riker's point about the paradox. Society requires men to take lethal risks to extract resources. You cannot run an oil rig without a certain degree of aggressive, risk-tolerant macho behavior.
You literally can't do the job without it.
But then, society legally and culturally pathologizes that exact same mindset the moment something goes wrong.
When I read this section, I immediately thought of that famous, blunt Ernest Hemingway quote, "Men die, that's what they're for." Riker is basically doing the brutal arithmetic of that quote. I want you to unpack his logic here, because he says biologically, sperm is cheap, but eggs are priceless.
It's the harsh reality of evolutionary reproduction.
Yeah.
Biologically speaking, one man can repopulate an entire village, but one woman is the village.
Wow, right.
Because female reproductive capacity is the bottleneck for human survival, nature, and by extension, society treats women as inherently valuable and men as inherently disposable. A man only has value if he is providing or protecting. If he dies doing it, society simply replaces him.
He paints this incredibly vivid, almost darkly comedic image to highlight the absurdity of how we talk about gender today. He says, imagine a 110-pound diversity and inclusion officer wrapped in a Patagonia fleece lecturing a 250-pound electrical lineman who just spent 14 hours repairing a transformer in the middle of a blizzard, and she's lecturing him about male fragility and his inherent privilege.
The absurdity of that image is exactly what Riker is weaponizing. He delves into a primal economic theory here. He argues that modern governments function as a daddy government complex.
A daddy government complex. Explain that mechanism. How does that work?
Riker argues that the state acts as a surrogate husband. It heavily taxes the labor of men working in these highly dangerous, high-mortality jobs. The roofers, the miners, the truck drivers.
Are the guys breaking their backs?
The government extracts wealth from their broken bodies and then funnels that exact tax money to fund the very academic institutions, like gender studies departments, that write peer-reviewed papers pathologizing those exact men as oppressors.
It's taxation without representation, or as Riker cheekily calls it, taxation without copulation. The state takes your money, gives it to people who hate you, and you get nothing in return.
Exactly.
And to prove that this gendered division of danger is an unchangeable reality, he points to the 2010 Chilean miner entrapment. 33 men were buried alive underground for 69 days, facing starvation and suffocating heat.
I remember watching that on the news.
Riker brutally notes that during those 69 days, there were exactly 0 feminist organizations protesting for equal representation in the collapsed mine. There were no female volunteers stepping up to replace them in the dark.
As Riker says, nature doesn't negotiate. Blood in the snow doesn't care about your pronouns. Because of this systemic exploitation of male labor, Riker expresses deep admiration for places like Dubai, which has no income tax.
Right.
He invokes John Galt from Ayn Rand's Atlas. Shrug the philosophy of starving the beast. Riker's advice to men is, If the system exploits your dangerous labor to fund your cultural demise, stop giving them your labor. Shrink your footprint. Opt out.
But this raises a massive contradiction, doesn't it? If the system is this transparently rigged, if it extracts their wealth, limits their language, and shames their biology, why do men put up with it? Why do guys keep waking up at 4 in the morning to pour concrete, fix the roads, and pay taxes to a system that Riker says hates them?
That is the tragedy at the center of Riker's thesis. His answer goes straight back to biology. He argues that men are biologically programmed by millions of years of evolution to protect and provide.
They can't help it.
They have an innate, almost inescapable need to be useful. This noble instinct makes them uniquely vulnerable to systemic exploitation. They desperately want to be the shield, even if the people they are shielding despise them. The system runs on hacking that noble instinct.
Okay, so if the outside world is a rigged game of physical danger, financial extraction, and linguistic traps, where do men go? Where do they go to rebuild themselves, away from the gaze of HR departments and family courts?
Riker has an answer for that.
He says there are still a few sanctuaries of raw masculinity left, and it brings us to a fascinating part of the book regarding iron temples.
This is a crucial pivot in the text. Riker transitions from diagnosing the macro-level problem to offering a tangible, physical, localized solution for the individual man.
He points out a crazy statistic. Gym memberships have spiked 500% since the year 2000. And he correlates that massive rise in weightlifting with a 40% drop in the male suicide rate, according to the CDC.
That correlation is striking.
He calls the gym the Iron Temple, and he elevates the physical act of lifting a barbell into something deeply philosophical. He calls the barbell a Lacanian truth teller that exposes the gap between your weak current self and your ideal I.
This is arguably his most brilliant application of Lacan's theories. When a man looks in the mirror at the gym, it isn't just about vanity or aesthetics.
Right.
Riker argues that when a man stands before a heavy barbell, he is confronting what Lacan calls the real, the unfiltered, absolute truth of gravity and physics. You cannot gaslight a 300-pound barbell.
You really can't.
You cannot use woke linguistics to convince the barbell it is actually 100 pounds. It either goes up or it crushes you. Progressive overload, the act of adding 5 pounds to the bar every single week, is a physical rejection of the comfort zones that modern society wants to keep men trapped inside.
But Riker warns that even these spaces, these iron temples, are under attack from the institutions. He points to Planet Fitness installing lunk alarms, literal sirens that go off if a guy grunts too loud or drops a heavy weight.
It's so absurd.
He points to high-end Equinox gyms with their eucalyptus towels and strict bans on lifting chalk. And on a broader societal scale, he points to the Boy Scouts of America filing for bankruptcy in 2019 after being forced to include girls and facing massive, crippling lawsuits. Let me ask you, is Riker seriously suggesting that society is intentionally, methodically dismantling these spaces for male bonding?
Yes, absolutely. He doesn't think it's an accident or a byproduct of progress. Riker introduces what he calls the castration calculus.
Castration calculus, wow.
He argues that feminist institutions actively target and sue fraternities, boys' clubs, and male-only spaces like the Augusta National Golf Club, not out of a genuine desire for equality or inclusion, but to strategically neutralize male tribal power.
Because men bonding together without female supervision is inherently dangerous to the system.
Precisely. If men are isolated, they are easily managed by the state. If they are bonded, they are a threat. And the psychological data completely backs up the male need for these spaces. Men with 3 or more close male friends have 60% lower depression rates.
60%.
Yet, instead of letting men bond organically in VFW halls, hunting camps, or garage gyms, the corporate world forces them into HR-approved diversity councils.
Where they are encouraged to share their feelings, be vulnerable, and cry.
Exactly. And Riker argues this is a trap. He claims that women biologically cannot respect men they emotionally dominate. So when institutions force men into this vulnerability, it isn't healing them. It is actively lowering a man's sexual market value and destroying his psychological armor.
I love the anecdote he uses to prove that this primal drive for strength simply cannot be suppressed, no matter how hard the system tries. He talks about a high-security prison in Nevada.
This story is incredible.
The wardens banned lifting chalk because it was making a mess. So what did the inmates do? They started stealing antacid pills from the infirmary and crushing them up on the concrete just to keep their grip dry for heavy bench presses. Men locked in cages, grinding down stomach medicine just so they could fight gravity.
It perfectly highlights the raw, irrepressible drive for physical mastery.
Wow.
Riker contrasts this prison yard resilience with modern woke therapy, which he claims is engaged in chemical castration.
Chemical castration.
He points out how modern doctors quickly push SSRI antidepressants and ADHD medication on 8-year-old boys simply because they fidget in math class and lack the physical outlets their biology demands.
He compares modern childhood to the Yupik tribes in Alaska. In those tribes, 6-year-old boys are handed sharp knives and expected to fillet 30-pound salmon. If they fail, they are mocked by the elders until they get it right.
A real rite of passage.
Contrast that with Brooklyn kindergartners getting put in timeout for using plastic safety scissors incorrectly.
Riker is demanding that the listener examine their own environment. He asks, "Do you have a tribe?" He heavily advocates for forming underground lifting groups, or what he calls a Midnight Academy secret, invite-only gatherings where men study classical philosophy, train in martial arts, and lift weights together outside the gaze of the state.
Outside the system.
Riker claims that evolutionary survival favors the men who bond over shared suffering and shared goals, not the modern therapy model of shared trauma dumping.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most vital piece of Riker's puzzle, because getting physically strong in a gym and having a close group of friends isn't enough if the institutions still control the narrative and the legal system.
Right, you need more than muscles.
Riker insists that men must wage asymmetric intellectual warfare to fully break free.
This is where the book reaches its tactical conclusion. Riker argues that you can't just lift heavy weights, you have to train your mind to deconstruct the semantic arguments used against you.
A broad back won't save you in family court.
Exactly. A broad back won't save you in family court or an HR tribunal. You need a sharp mind.
And he points out that the institutions are currently highly vulnerable to this kind of attack. Riker notes that modern universities now have lower public approval ratings than used car salesmen. The public is waking up to the grift.
The trust is totally gone.
He cites a highly damaging 2023 Harvard study finding that 74% of social justice academics rely on personal narratives, what they call their lived experience, rather than objective data or scientific method. Riker calls this emotional blackmail masquerading as scholarship.
Because it is emotional blackmail, you cannot fight it with emotion. Riker provides tactical, actionable advice. He advocates for a total return to the medieval trivium, the study of grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
A classic.
He says mastering these classical tools is the only antidote to woke emotionality.
I love his tactical breakdown of steel manning and Socratic jiu-jitsu. When I read this, it felt like learning a verbal martial art. I want you to break this down for the audience. According to Riker, when someone in a corporate meeting or a social setting accuses a man of toxic masculinity, how exactly should he respond?
Riker says the biggest mistake men make is getting defensive or apologizing. Instead, you use Socratic jiu-jitsu. You force definitions. You demand objective proof.
Make them explain it.
You treat gender theory with the same polite, baffling skepticism you would use if someone tried to convince you the earth is flat. If they say masculinity is toxic, agree with their premise conditionally and then ask a question that destroys it.
Like what?
Like, if traditional masculinity is so toxic, why do female Tinder profiles overwhelmingly demand 6-foot-tall, emotionally stoic, high-earning, toxic CEOs? Why doesn't the behavioral data match the sociological theory?
That is brilliant.
You use their own behavioral data to trap their ideological claims.
And this intellectual warfare is already happening heavily in the digital realm. Riker points to the video platform Rumble, which exploded in user growth by 400%, precisely as men fled YouTube's strict censorship algorithms.
A massive migration.
He talks about 4chan's meme warfare, specifically the famous Chad versus Virgin meme. Riker, hilariously but accurately, calls that meme the Odyssey for Nihilists.
The Odyssey for Nihilists, I love that.
It's a modern myth-making process, a way of establishing a new symbolic order happening completely outside the control of HR departments and university deans.
Through these tactics, Riker encourages men to build what he terms a micro-patriarchy. If you cannot control the macro institutions, you establish absolute sovereignty over your own domain.
Your own little kingdom.
Whether that means buying land off the grid, homeschooling your children, or just establishing absolute security over your digital life.
He tells this amazing apocalyptic story to prove why this micropatriarchy is necessary. He talks about Hurricane Mike. Mike was a prepper living in Florida. When a Category 5 hurricane completely flattened his town, FEMA was nowhere to be found.
Completely absent.
So what did Mike do? He didn't wait for the government. He traded his crypto wallet for a truckload of canned beans, grabbed his ham radio, and effectively became the neighborhood warlord of common sense.
Warlord of common sense.
He fired up his massive grill, organized a perimeter, and fed dozens of families while the bureaucrats in Washington were probably sitting on Zoom calls debating diversity quotas for disaster relief.
It's such a perfect example.
It perfectly proves Riker's point. When real physical chaos hits, society instantly drops the woke posturing and begs for traditional, competent masculinity.
Riker brilliantly ties this need for competent masculinity back to the modern digital landscape, specifically cybersecurity. He points out that the AES-256 encryption algorithm, the digital wall protecting all the world's banking data, military secrets, and private communications, was built by two guys.
Two Belgian dudes in a basement.
Right. Not a diverse committee of academics, but two guys obsessed with solving a complex problem. Riker compares a password manager to a digital spear and a VPN to a castle moat.
The modern armor.
The ultimate overarching message of Riker's book is this: stop playing by the rules of institutions that fundamentally hate you. Do not ask for their approval. Do not seek validation from a system designed to extract your labor.
Right.
Instead, infect everything you do with absolutely unstoppable skill, technical competence, and physical strength. Become undeniable.
Okay, wow. We have covered a massive, sprawling amount of ground today. We started with Arnold Schwarzenegger weaponizing Lacanian mirror stages between bench presses.
We really went everywhere.
We explored how gender-neutral language intentionally dismantles the cultural symbolic order. We looked at the brutal, primal economics of how society treats male labor as completely disposable while simultaneously pathologizing male nature. And we explored the controversial, unapologetic tactics of the manosphere to reclaim physical, intellectual, and digital sovereignty.
It is undeniably a dense, highly polarizing, and aggressive worldview. But as we've seen today, it is internally consistent, logically structured, and it is clearly resonating with millions of men who feel entirely alienated by modern institutions.
And as a reminder to you, our listener, our goal today was a strict, objective exploration of Conrad Riker's text. We wanted to help you understand the architecture of the red pill perspective on history and modern society, entirely without taking a side, endorsing, or condemning the claims made in the book.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought that builds on Riker's text, but looks toward the future.
Let's hear it.
Riker ends his book by quoting Jacques Lacan one last time. I am not. I am becoming.
I am becoming.
If the traditional institutions that historically defined and channeled masculinity are truly as compromised, hostile, and captured as Riker claims, what new unseen structures will the next generation of men build in the shadows to replace them? And the real question, will those new structures liberate men, or will they simply create a brand new set of chains?
A phenomenal, heavy question to chew on as you go about your day. All right, that wraps up our deep dive into Unlock Your True Self, Mastering Lacanian Psychology. Before you go, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the show, and go check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook. And be sure to follow the author at Conrad Meiker over at Substack. Thanks for exploring the depths with us. We'll see you next time.